Right, everyone. Welcome back to Crypto Brain. Now listen carefully, because what is happening inside Japan right now could end up becoming one of the most important crypto stories of 2026. And strangely enough, the vast majority of retail investors still do not seem to understand how serious this situation may actually be. Because over the past few days, something extremely unusual has started happening around XRP, Ripple, and Japan's banking system. And the timing of it all is what has analysts paying very close attention. A tweet suddenly exploded across social media saying, "Now sell Bitcoin and hold XRP. Pump confirmed." Now normally, most experienced investors would ignore a statement like that immediately. Crypto Twitter produces thousands of emotional posts every single day, but this time the market reaction felt different. Why? Because this narrative did not appear in isolation. It appeared at the exact same moment reports began surfacing about Japanese banks exploring crypto-linked infrastructure, digital settlement systems, stablecoin integration, and Ripple-connected financial activity. And this is where the story becomes genuinely interesting. Because historically, the biggest financial transitions do not begin with headlines. They begin quietly in the background, while the public remains distracted by price action, memes, and short-term volatility. Institutions move first. Infrastructure gets tested second. Regulation follows after that. And only at the very end does the retail crowd realize that the market has already started shifting beneath their feet. Now think about this carefully. Why does Ripple's name continue appearing inside conversations related to banking infrastructure, cross-border liquidity, payment corridors, and institutional settlement systems? Why does Japan repeatedly emerge in these discussions? And perhaps most importantly, why are some analysts suddenly suggesting that Asia may become the testing ground for blockchain-integrated financial systems before the West fully catches up? That is not normal market behavior. What makes this even more fascinating is that Japan has quietly maintained one of the deepest long-term relationships with Ripple anywhere in the world. Over the years, Ripple-related payment initiatives, banking collaborations, and infrastructure discussions have continued developing behind the scenes, while most retail investors remained focused entirely on price charts. But now the conversation appears to be changing very rapidly, because this is no longer just about crypto speculation. This is about whether traditional banking systems are beginning to prepare for a completely different financial framework. And if that sounds dramatic, consider what is already happening globally. Stablecoins are expanding aggressively. Tokenized assets are becoming a serious discussion inside institutional finance. Cross-border payment systems are being modernized. Governments are increasingly discussing digital financial infrastructure. And throughout many of these conversations, XRP repeatedly continues appearing as part of the broader narrative. Now here is where things become psychologically dangerous for the market. Most retail investors still approach crypto emotionally. They chase candles, they follow hype, they react after moves happen. But institutional capital behaves very differently. Institutions study liquidity flows, settlement efficiency, regulation, compliance frameworks, and long-term infrastructure potential. And when large financial players begin quietly positioning themselves around emerging systems, the public usually notices far too late. That is exactly why some investors believe the market may be underestimating what is happening around XRP right now. Because if traditional banking systems truly begin integrating blockchain-based settlement infrastructure at scale, then utility-focused digital assets could suddenly move from speculative investments into strategic financial tools. And if that transition begins faster than expected, the current market structure could change dramatically within a very short period of time. At that point, the conversation would no longer revolve around memes, hype cycles, or temporary pumps. The conversation would shift toward infrastructure ownership, institutional liquidity, and financial integration on a global scale. And if that transition is already quietly beginning, then many retail investors may still be looking in the wrong direction entirely. This is why some analysts believe the next crypto cycle could look completely different from previous ones. Instead of being driven purely by retail speculation, the next phase may increasingly revolve around regulation, banking adoption, tokenized finance, and cross-border settlement efficiency. And in that environment, assets connected to real-world utility could suddenly become far more important than most people currently expect. Now, whether XRP ultimately becomes a central part of that future remains to be seen. But one thing is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The number of institutional, banking, and infrastructure conversations surrounding Ripple and XRP continues growing at a very aggressive pace. And historically, when narratives begin shifting this quickly, smart money tends to pay attention long before the crowd does. So perhaps the biggest question investors should be asking themselves right now is not whether XRP can pump tomorrow. Perhaps the real question is whether the global financial system is quietly moving toward blockchain-based infrastructure much faster than the public currently realizes. Because if that turns out to be true, then what we are witnessing today may eventually be remembered as the early stages of an entirely new financial era. And if you enjoyed this analysis, make sure you subscribe to Crypto Brain, turn on notifications, and let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you believe XRP is quietly positioning itself for institutional adoption, or do you think this is simply another temporary market narrative? I would genuinely love to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.